Welcome back to ABC24 This Week. I'm joined by local ABC24 political analyst Otis Sanford, old habits die hard, yep. Chris Tudor, attorney and former Shelby County GOP chairman, and Sam Hardiman, reporter with the Commercial Appeal. And I want to start with you, Sam, because I know you and I have been following this issue closely with MLGW and TVA and all of what the muckety-muck that's been involved with all of that. Interesting story that was published by the Daily Memphian this week, revealing that Mark Yates, who's the executive vice president, regional vice president, I should say, for West Tennessee for the TVA, was hired in light of this, as part of this process was ongoing. And we learned that his wife is a business partner with an MLGW board member. They own a restaurant together in Midtown. Obviously raises the issue of potential conflict of interest. The reporter who did the story had a heck of a time getting a quote from anybody, any kind of response, which struck me as odd. We can talk about that later. And what would you say, if any, this kind of revelation, what effect it has on the process?
I would say first I want to say Mark Karaskia from the Institute for Public Service Reporting did a great job with that story, and the Institute does a great job. I'm not really sure what the Daily Memphian had to do with it besides publishing it. But I would say that the story, I think, raises a very interesting question when it comes time for the MLGW board, if Carly McCullough, the board member in question, is still on the board, it's time to vote on Memphis leaving or deciding to stay with the Tennessee Valley Authority. I think Mark's story really raises the question of whether or not she should recuse herself when it comes to that point. And beyond that, I'm not really sure it changes very much. Right, the MLGW is expecting cured bids that have been readied from some errors to be returned in the next couple of days. I think February 9th is that day. And so it's an issue that I think is on the horizon. And I think it was a really good piece of revelatory reporting.
The issue of how little board members are required to disclose any potential conflicts, financial conflicts especially. We learned from some of the interviews in that story that what policies are in place are really pretty lax and could be tightened up quite a bit. How much of a concern do you think that is?
I think that it is definitely a concern, and I think it's something that MLGW should probably take a look at. I mean, the MLGW Board of Commissioners is not a body that is often looked at by the press in this community. Typically, when I'm watching MLGW board meeting, they last about a half an hour. And with all due respect to the volunteers who aren't compensated for their time, it's largely viewed, and I think it's viewed by MLGW leadership, as a sort of rubber stamp board in which it pretty much acquiesces to what MLGW executive leadership, the options that are presented to them. So I think, given that the billions of dollars that are at stake, with Memphis potentially leaving the TVA, Memphis ratepayers pay $1 billion every year in electricity. We're talking billions of dollars. Maybe those disclosures should be enhanced and put on the internet a little bit.
Yeah, if I'm in a volunteer board position, I might be very interested in where the money is being spent and how it's being spent. Mm-hmm. Chris, you're watching this from afar, not as a journalist. As you see this story develop, just what are your thoughts on what's happening and what's the best path for the community?
Yeah, so many twists and turns here. I feel like this is going on forever, but obviously appreciate our journalists staying on the case and this sort of reporting. I agree with Sam that, you know, this is hundreds of millions, billions of dollars at stake. And I think regardless of how this particular issue that's been reported on this week is resolved, you know, I think it's still pretty unclear at this point. But I think Sam's exactly right that MLGW needs to take a very, very close look at their conflict of interest policies, at their ethical guidelines, and because it's an incredibly important institution in this community. It's one of the largest consolidated utilities in the United States. And they have a massive decision to make that's going to affect every single person that lives in this area for decades to come. And we just need to have the public, we, the citizens, need to have utmost confidence that that process is above board. And again, I'm not making any insinuations right now. I just think it's the opportunity for them to step up to the plate and make sure that that all the ethical guidelines and conflicts of interest policies are well thought out and in place and available to be viewed by the public.
You know, Otis, I don't have to tell you, nothing raises a reporter's antenna more than when people won't talk.
Exactly.
And that's another issue that really struck me about this article is the TVA would not make Mark Yates available. Right. The MLG board member was not made available. Right. Would not comment on a number of issues related to this story, which only makes any reporter, and I would hope most citizens, just that much more curious and suspicious about what's really going on.
Well, no question about it. And they've spent a lot of time here trying to do public relations in this community. They've spent a lot of money pumping into this community to do public relations. But when a story like this, and Sam is absolutely right, this was outstanding reporting by Mark Pereskia at the Institute. It raises the issues around ethics, and it raises the issue around lack of transparency. And the fact that nobody was willing to talk about it after this was a several months investigation that Mark did here, and nobody was willing to talk. It does raise the question of what are you trying to hide, and it calls for some changes, certainly in the ethics policies of MLGW, and also requires TVA to be a little bit more upfront rather than putting money in the community for public relations.
Absolutely. And the numbers I'm hearing floating around, this could be a $5–6 billion proposition for the utility. That's right up there in Ford Motor Company territory
Yes,
in terms of how much is at stake. All right, we're going to take a break. We'll be right back.